Welcome back one and all to StarCraft 2 Co-op Guide, where I teach all of you the do's, don'ts, and the entire kit of the commander for this video, Dehaka. For all those that are new to the game, Dehaka is basically Yoshi if he had a lot of defects due to his mom clearly being an anti-vaxxer. Remember boys, natural remedies only. All jokes aside, if you're new to the series and the channel, welcome. Also, if you are interested in learning about other commanders, I have a similar video on all the commanders below. The playlist for all these commanders is in the description below. Now to get right back to the topic at hand. Dehaka. As you can already tell, he belongs to the Zerg faction. However, he goes different beyond just looks, as Dehaka can talk a somewhat broken speech.
Essence is change. Change is survival. Collect and live. Stay still and die.
Compared to the normal growling and roaring that normal Zerg do that gets annoying as time goes on. Dehaka, like many of his kind, are the remnants of what the Zerg race originally was before the Overmind made them hive-minded, as you all know. Dehaka is a primal Zerg, which, for those who don't understand primal, it's basically a Zerg dinosaur. Primal Zerg being different as they rely on a rapid evolution to not only survive and grow stronger, but to never age.
They gather essence for thousands of years. They are blinded, but they are not foolish.
My guess is that Dehaka is maybe a few thousand years old. So in other words, he is a powerhouse that you are going to see is going to be carrying the entire game, both your ally and your own army. Also, that you will notice throughout the entire video is that the topic of one must die and another may grow stronger, and that there is always a bigger fish. These ideas have a heavy emphasis as not only do you need to devour your enemies, but you also need to devour your own in order to become stronger. And Dehaka's command structure is focused on pack leadership. He is the top dog and no one tries him, and for good reason. While every other pack leader brings their own unique units and abilities to the table. The war table, by the way, not the dinner table. With all the introductions out of the way, let's move on to the topic of the video, starting out with his abilities. Very powerful, but reasonably balanced for some anonymous reason. I know, the sheer thought of something balanced in co-op mode is beyond me, but let's move on to the abilities, which are very powerful, but are very limited to a very small duration and a very long cooldown. Starting off in a cave near you is Glevig, a giant worm-like Zerg capable of spitting acid that burns like fire. It's basically fire breath, just in a very, very, very large area. So for simplicity, he breathes fire and summoned into the fight for 60 seconds and a cooldown of 120 seconds, otherwise known as 2 minutes. Keep in mind that the 60-second duration in a fight and the cooldown of 120 seconds, besides the initial startup time, is going to be universal for all of his pack leaders besides Dehaka. But back onto Glevig. Glevig is a powerful, somewhat stationary hero that is capable of dealing massive damage and consistent damage with AoE breath. So all of his basic attacks will now do area damage. But the part about Glevig that makes him insanely strong, if not one of the best abilities in the game, is his acid breath. It is capable of dealing the highest numbers of damage in the game, and to top it off is a very large area covered, very long range, and a very short cooldown. But because he's stationary, this can be bypassed by deep tunneling wherever he wants as long as there is vision present, making him not only a deadly defense, but an amazing offense for dealing especially with enemy attack waves. In my opinion, the best primal leader. Glevig does spawn basic units upon spawn, but they are so unreliable and terrible that they're not even worth mentioning. So let's move on to the next commander slash ability, they're all pack leaders, is Murvar, the Eternal Mother. Being a swarm host pack leader, Murvar has a severe skin condition, which allows her to summon 6 locusts, which can later be upgraded to hit air targets as well, while spawning at the same time 6 suicide locusts, which deal high bursts of damage to any target, land, or air. Murvar does have a basic attack, but due to its low DPS and just severe unreliability, it is not worth counting on at all, and you're going to be generally relying on the locusts that spawn. A redeemable part is that she is capable of spawning an aura or cloud of fungus that slows units while preventing enemy units to use any energy-based abilities and somehow causing structures to to not attack as well. So Morvar is best used in dropping right inside of the enemy lines. With its high burst of damage, it is best used as a sieging unit and breaking enemy defenses rather than using it as a force to regularly be used like Dehaka, the next leader, and Glevik, the previous one. The last of the pack leaders, as you have already suspected, is limited to the same cooldown as the other two, is Dehaka. Thick, with 3C armor that is spiked, which means that damage will be dealt back to any target that has the wise decision to hurt him. And with him being a tank plus his armor makes him almost immune to small enemies and grouped up enemies, as they don't stand a chance against his very powerful, yet very small cooldown, charge attack, dealing massive damage in a very massive area. Sign my ass up. I love that. Dehaka is overall going to be mainly used for dealing with very large amounts of very low health but very high in number enemies, while being able to tank most damage, leading the assault and dealing actually more defensive capabilities than Dehaka himself. Closing the distance with his deadly charge ability and with his heavy armor makes him a force to be reckoned with. Now you might be wondering, I could be talking about the Greater Primal Worm, which in reality is just a weaker form of Glevik and a much stronger version of the worm that you normally morph with the drones, which is never a good idea because the drones are hard to get as it is. With a very slow fire rate and the ability to deep tunnel and have a breath that isn't as strong as Glevik, but definitely does a really good amount of increased damage that can change the output of a fight, they are mainly going to be used as a last resort defense if Dehaka can't deep tunnel back or you don't have a primal leader charge. In reality, you're going to be using them for more defensive purposes as a last resort. Also, having the ability to detect enemies makes them really good for dealing with cloaked enemies very early on. But with a slow fire rate, it honestly doesn't make them as redeemable despite the fact that they have 3 charges maximum. At the end of the day, these powerful abilities are going to be balanced out by their very long cooldown and their very short duration that can only be increased slightly through mastery and prestige. So just make sure at the end of the day that this is not an ability you want to use lightly. This is an ability that you need to make sure that you're using to the best possible way and getting the maximum usage out, because it's going to be a while before you can get it again, which you might need it. The basic mechanics of Dehaka is quite interesting, since he still works in a pack idea and the idea of there's always a bigger fish. The idea of consuming one another to become stronger is how Dehaka is able to access his advanced units through primal combat, a process that engages 2 of the same Zerg units to fight to the death, and the victor will grow stronger while the other one dies. When it comes to Dehaka's advanced units, you're always going to be paying 2 for the price of 1, and this is not a good deal. But at the end of the day, it's not like you have much of a choice, since his basic units that he has available for his arsenal is laughable at best, and there's only 1 or 2 that are even decent, and even then they have their shortcomings. Thanks Blizzard, really needed it. Since Dehaka's troops are amazing with the agreeable price for some, the balance of them is limited by the spawn amount, so you can't constantly pump out new troops, and there is a nasty cooldown attached to not only the barracks type troops, but also to the hive where the workers are produced is drastically reduced as well. However, when primal combat is complete, there is a very small chance the unit will get a mutation effect that is capable of insane stat changes like more damage, armor, range, attack speed, defense, and rate of fire, the list goes on. This, however, isn't anything to be relied on, as it is completely random, and the odds of even getting more than one effect is even reduced even more. So, powerful, but by all means not something constant. Taking to the battlefield himself and starting as small as a siege tank and eventually becoming Godzilla himself is Dehaka, one of the strongest units in the game. You know, he's a hero unit too, but that's besides the point. He's still arguably the strongest unit in the game. Dehaka starts out very small. Every kill of an enemy drops the little orangish yellow DNA that drops on the ground called essence. Picking up this essence, rather through killing enemies directly or by using abilities, feeds this bar. When this bar is filled, he'll level up. He will get a small damage boost and health bonus and a skill point, which he already starts with 2 at the beginning of the game. These skill points can be used to purchase new abilities or upgrading existing ones. You can specialize Dehaka to fit a certain purpose for your army to compensate, or eventually you can hit max level and he becomes an army of himself, being able to deal damage to both air units, cloaked units, burrowed units, armored units, hybrids, large amount of units, small amount of units. Honestly, he covers every single field once you level up and give him all of his abilities and upgrades. However, due to the sheer amount of time it would take to explain every single upgrade in each level of them and the impact they have on each level, I'm not going to go into that for the sake of both of us. It's too much work on my end and it's way too much information on your end. Instead, I will give you what the ability does and show its levels on screen, so if you want to pause the video to know exactly what every single change to every single level of the ability does, you can simply just pause the video and be done with it. So let's move on to all of his abilities. There's quite a bit, so let's do this rapid fire. Primal Regeneration gives a passive heal to all nearby units, including Dehaka himself, which can keep the time out of the fight minimal and completely avoid small arms damage as he heals too fast for them to even make a dent. Keen Senses allows Dehaka to have detection, which means no need for support units, as Dehaka doesn't even have any in the first place. Keep in mind that he doesn't start out with this ability, as he does need to hit a certain level in order to unlock it. Chitinous Plating increases the base armor by 3, making him completely absorb most damage done by regular units, while being able to easily deal with hybrids even at an early level. Deadly Reach is an ability that is only unlocked at level 10, which allows Dehaka's basic attack of his claw strikes to deal damage to air units as well, which he could have done at the beginning, but whatever. Leap closes the distance from Dehaka and his targets, dealing massive damage that scales up in damage and in radius the bigger he gets, while giving temporary armor on landing. This is one of the only area of effect abilities he has to be able to disperse very large crowds. I recommend very heavily for infested maps. Intimidating Roar, affecting a very large area that reduces the movement speed of enemies drastically and their attack speed by a little bit. Mainly used when dealing with very large numbers of enemies and after being upgraded, weakening entire armies and bosses. His most complicated yet his most powerful ability, Devour. Dehaka's best ability by far. It can be unlocked as soon as Dehaka spawns from the cave once he came, instantly killing any unit selected, eating them whole, and healing a portion of his health, and the cooldown is entirely based off of the unit's health that he has eaten. So if he eats a hybrid at full health, the cooldown is going to be extremely long. If he eats a hybrid that only has 1 health, the cooldown will be almost instant. The same thing applies for every other enemy unit that he eats, and no, bosses don't count unfortunately. However, after devouring a target, he also absorbs certain effects for a temporary amount of time. This ability is so broken as level 1 Dehaka can eat a whole hybrid and somehow having a large cooldown on the ability, but gaining multiple bonuses from the hybrid. One such example is to reduce the cooldowns of devouring a psionic enemy. In case you're wondering, here are the other effects. The final ability, Scorching Breath, storing up to 3 charges and dealing great damage to any enemy that the effect hits. Both air and land are not going to be safe, as the lasting effect of the fire burns afterwards. Amazing at dealing damage to very large amounts of enemies and weakening very big ones. However, not all of his abilities are unlocked through skill points, as one of them he starts off with. This of course is deep tunneling. As you already know, as long as you have explored this area, you are able to move that unit to that area, and since Dehaka starts out with it, giving him an insane amount of mobility. I find it best that universally focus on unlocking all 3 tiers of Devour first, as it's going to be your most versatile ability. Every other ability you want to focus on getting is completely dependent on the map. For example, on an infested map, you want to get a lot of the area effect abilities like Scorching Breath and Leap in order to deal damage to large amounts of weak units. But if you're dealing with very armored targets, and if you're dealing with air units, you want to use their respective abilities. With Dehaka literally carrying the entire weight of responsibility for both his team and your ally on his only shoulder, his army is going to be there for support, especially in the early game as it becomes hard for Dehaka to defend himself. Produced in Eggs of 5 is the Primal Hatchery, capable of getting up and moving around and even attacking other enemies. However, due to the low damage and the inconsistency of its rate of fire, it's just not better at all. Primal Zerglings, laughable at best. Due to primal combat existing, it is best not to use the basic form of units, as their evolved counterparts are just better in almost every single way. So when it comes down to it, like units like Zerglings, the only value that they can provide is opening up expansions early due to their fast movement speed and fast attacking speed, affordability, and just how early on you get them in the game. But other than that, they are useless. When two Zerglings successfully fight and one kills each other, morphs into a Ravisser. Cheap artillery units that, even though they do have a lower DPS than the Zergling counterpart, they have a range advantage which upgrades to not only increase that range but increase the attack speed. Not the best army to make alone, but combined with a few tanky units in the front makes them redeemable, with upgrading bonus of huge damage against armored units with its dissolving acid. Overall, they are not going to be amazing units to bring by themselves, as they are very squishy and have no anti-air, even with Dehaka making up for it. They're not amazing units, but they are not terrible units, but they could be a lot better. And here we have the Primal Roach, which is in the same situation as the Zergling. Just overall not worth making in the first place. Plus you have to unlock them through Glevig's Den, and they're gonna cost more, so just overall don't make them unless you're gonna evolve them into something a little bit more interesting. The Primal Roach can evolve into two forms, one of which is the Primal Igniter. A much better version of the Roach in every way besides just being bigger. Armored assault units that, instead of having a bile of acid to fire, following the name the Igniter, is capable of dealing damage using fire breath. Don't ask me how it has it, but whatever. Dealing not only splash damage at very close range, but capable of bonus damage against light units that can be improved even further with the concentrated fire perk. This makes Primal Igniters a must-have with dealing with infested maps. The other evolution of the Primal Roach, however very, very, very expensive, is the Guardian. You've seen these guys before. With the strength of dealing damage to ground units at very long ranges, as they are an air artillery unit, capable of dealing large damage on a pretty consistent rate, especially with Primordial Fury, where the attack speed will gradually increase as they constantly fire. But with low health and almost zero defense against other air units, makes them good on their own if Dehaka can compensate it. If they can't, it's better to mix them. The Primal Hydralisks are in an interesting situation, as they are a redeemable basic unit that does hold its own in a fight with the coverage of both air and land. However, due to a lack of upgrades and the more evolved units being just a lot better overall, the Hydralisk doesn't feel bad, it just feels very outdated. You can still use it in an army, and it can still provide amazing support, but you're better off evolving it into something a lot more powerful and equally expensive. You already know that on this channel, whenever I mention anything concerning Mutalisks, it's always good besides the price. Primal Mutalisks are capable of carrying the game even better than Dehaka, surprisingly, which makes them his best unit by far. And a unit that is not only recommended by spamming, but a unit that can hold their own and has amazing abilities through survivability and just sheer damage. Slicing Glaive allows the Mutalisk to deal 100% more damage to other air units, so that Dehaka can use all of his ground-focused abilities in order to wipe out all of the ground forces. Then comes the excessive survivability, as they're able to be upgraded to take less damage. 50% actually, while moving, and the ability to rebirth themselves. Primal Reconstruction should be purchased before even producing any Mutalisks due to their sheer price. You're better off having this extra fail-safe safety net sort of upgrade before you actually start investing a lot into units. A big investment, but oh my lord, they wipe the map easily. Mainly built for defense, yet having a very strong offensive capacity, is the Impaler, a variation of the Lurker that doesn't fire as often, but when it hits hard. Not having a basic attack means things get complicated, as the only way for them to attack is for them to burrow underground to attack. Excellent for sieging enemy fortifications, as the range very much outbeats most other range in the game. Plus, being burrowed means that as long as there is no detector present, they are completely safe from harm. Excellent for not only sieging enemy fortifications, but also dealing an insane amount of damage to slow-moving targets that are normally going to be bosses. But due to the travel time of the tentacle underground, they are not really good against moving targets, as the tentacle is very hard to land. However, the slight problem is that they have actually more attack range than vision. This requires your army to move forward and advance on the enemies so that you get that vision, so you can even use any of that range. But trust me, you will wipe out bases insanely quickly. So Dehaka pushes forward, or any pack leader or any army composition pushes forward, while the Impalers sit it behind and poke at their defenses. And something important to note is that they have this upgrade. It's really weird. It's called Tenderize. Now what this does is it makes them take more damage over time, as a tentacle absolutely obliterates their armor and flesh. This also increases the healing effectiveness of Dehaka's Devour ability, making a good combination and a must-have in any composition, defense, or offense. But if all these units have not satisfied your taste for sieging enemy structures, then you have the Primal Host. Spawning from the back, literally, is 2 locusts that have amazing armor, even better HP, spitting at enemies dealing great damage, and these units are best used together with the more evolved version, which drastically reduce the fighting time in combat, and you will see why. Note that these locusts are used more as a defensive wall to not only protect the Primal Host, but to push the front line. They're going to be constantly spawning, so the Primal Host is always good to have not only in an offensive manner, but more in a defensive manner, as they're able to not only move around easily, but they're able to set up defensive positions and set up temporary armies with insane durability. I would keep in mind that you need to unlock a upgrade that allows them to hit other air targets, because hitting just ground targets isn't gonna cut it. Working entirely the same, with only one key difference of a drastically shorter lifespan, is the Creep Host. Bigger, spikier than the Primal Host. Yes, that is true. But on its back spawns a pair of Primal Locusts that explode on death, dealing massive damage to any land and later upgraded air targets. You're gonna need both the Primal Host and the Creep Host, as the Creep Host is gonna use up its Locusts relatively quickly for that high burst of damage. But they won't have anything to protect them, which is why you need the Primal Host. Trust me, I've seen what happens when you just spam one or the other. Trust me when I say this, you need both. The Primal Ultralisk. Also inferior in almost every way. It is a basic unit that deals a very large amount of damage, especially with the ability to use Brutal Charge, charging forward automatically, closing the distance and knocking back all enemies, while the basic attacks have a chance to stun, which makes them absolutely amazing. And also, the cooldown on these abilities is very low as well. The downside, of course, and this is both not only for the Ultralisk, but the more evolved version that requires 2 of them, which means more of the price, is that these units, even though they are absolutely amazing, they cost a huge amount. But if you're unsatisfied by the Ultralisk, somehow, then combine the 2 to make a Tyrannosaur. Even more expensive than the last, as it requires 2 Ultralisks to make this unit, but better than the Ultralisk in almost every way. Losing the Brutal Charge ability, yet gaining an anti-air attack, which is one of the Ultralisk's biggest problems besides its cost. With the Barrage Spike ability, which deals damage automatically to nearby units, air and ground units, best handling for all sorts of threats. While he still keeps most of the Ultralisk upgrades at Dakrun's Den, also gaining an aura that increases the armor of nearby units by 2. Not worth making in large numbers, however very powerful, but all you really just need is 1 and 2 to tank the damage while other units deal out more damage. Now before I move into Mastery and Prestige, there's one thing I need to make clear, is that because of how powerful Dehaka actually is, you can actually rush certain units that are early or late game, and that there's some units that you by all means can use in very large numbers. However, I don't recommend it if you want success on much higher difficulties. I play on a difficulty that allows me to have the flexibility to only use 1 unit while also providing a decent challenge. Now let's move into the Mastery and Prestige system, which is a system that takes a lot of time and dedication that shows that you are a true StarCraft co-op player.
I will taste their essence. Then I will know them.
Ending off the video as we normally do with the system that takes true dedication. The system known as a Mastery and Prestige system. Past level 15, you get access to some of the biggest game changers and buffs possible that is shared throughout all commanders. Power set 1 is about Dehaka and just him, as you can clearly see. Devour healing increased to a max of 30%, drastically increasing Dehaka's survivability in combat. Increasing the healing rate of biological units increased the healing rate of eating a biological unit from 20% to 40%, so Dehaka can rely on damage through his abilities and basic attacks. However, if you rely on Dehaka using those devoured to his advantage, increasing the buff duration of his devour by 90%. A massive increase and a buff to all of his stats depending on what he eats. But at the end of the day, I would still go for healing because his time in combat is a lot more worth than the temporary buffs he gets while in it. For power set 2, it looks like an error on my part when in actuality it's just a playstyle difference. I go with the greater primal worm cooldown by 60% as I focused on evolving Dehaka as early as possible. However, pack leader duration increased by 30% is a much better choice overall, and that I'd recommend for most players. Now for power set 3, I would normally be tempted to choose the gene mutation chance. However, a solid attack speed bonus for Dehaka provides, in my opinion, a much more overall value that is actually consistent. When it comes down to the gene mutation chance, it's a roll of the dice, and you can get a mutation that would be useful for your army or not useful for your army. It's completely random and out of your control. If you want to reset your commander back to level 1 and lose all those mastery perks to earn them again, these perks, you guessed it, helps and hinders the man of the hour, Dehaka. Devouring one increases the usage of Devour as you would guess, except the effect works on all nearby units as well. However, the trade-off to this buff is that he gets absolutely 0 base armor, his max level cap is reduced by 11, which means his max health and damage, and loses his Scorch Breath ability, which is a hard trade-off. I would recommend this prestige if you were going to be specializing and using Dehaka to kill a lot of singular strong units like hybrids and not use him for infested maps. Primal Contender is a focus on all the pack leaders, including Dehaka. Only having one pack leader out at once, this means that when you summon Movlar into battle, Dehaka will disappear as long as another pack leader is up. And for this trade-off, you have 50% more damage, which is insane. You have 100% more health. So more power, but only having one pack leader active at once. And the most unique of the three is Brood Brother. If you thought Dehaka was already powerful enough, well now there's 2 of them. And as you know, for his buffs and his abilities and everything that I've already listed in the video, you already know Dehaka's extremely powerful, so now you multiply that by 2. The downside of this, of course, is that you have to micromanage both of Dehaka's abilities, but the essence is also not shared between them. This means you have to individually level up with them, which means you're ultimately most likely not going to get to the max level with both heroes. You're only going to have to prioritize on one or divide it equally between the two. Realistically, you can't have both. So at the end of the day, your entire success is going to be entirely made up of Dehaka and how aggressive you are with him. Now with all of this information, both in his kit, his mechanics, his abilities, his units, and even his mastery and prestige points, you can understand that in order to be successful as Dehaka overall, is to be very aggressive with Dehaka, especially in the early game, getting those early levels, and making sure you have an army that's able to combat any type of enemy as soon as you find out what type of enemy you're facing. Now before I end the video, there is something important I need to state, which I probably in hindsight probably should have said at the beginning of the video, but let's go on with it anyways. Something that is quite important to not only this series but the future of the channel is, like most things in life, they don't last forever. And this series, it's coming to an end soon, and it's not ending tomorrow or anything, but it's one of those things where I only have a handful of commanders left in the game. I only have 5 more, and assuming I produce a video once every, let's say, even 2 weeks and everything, you're maybe looking at maybe 2 months, maybe even a 1 month, depending on how fast I get them finished. And with all the support and love and honestly growth the channel has been getting over the last few months and everything, which don't get me wrong, I am eternally grateful for, I don't want everyone who subscribed me for the StarCraft content to just leave as soon as I stop. So honestly, you can do yourself a favor, since I'm making these videos for your entertainment. As long as I like the process and all that stuff, you get that part. Leave down in the comments below on what you want to see for some video ideas. I already have some things in the works, and I have some things that I've never told a living soul about, and I only plan on telling people as soon as the video is released. At the end of the day, I hope you all enjoyed the video. I hope you found this somewhat informative, and hell, maybe you got a bit of a laugh out of it. But that's all for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you are loving the channel, if you are loving the content, hell, if you're loving me, be sure to scroll down below and hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all of the content coming your way. This is ToxicSpill. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I will see you all in the next one. And remember, do stuff you love. Signing off.